is Mary Beth Gassman. I'm a professor at Rutgers University. And I also am very, very honored that I get to serve as the executive director of the Rutgers Center for Minority Serving Institutions. This session today, which is called Optimal Board Structures and Committees for Transformative Leadership at Minority Serving Institutions, is funded by ECMC Foundation. We are so glad to have them as a partner and that they value these issues. And it's also co-sponsored with the Association for Governing Boards, AGB, and we are thrilled to be partnering with them for this series. This session is part of a series, and if you attended the first one, and you attend this and you continue to attend the next ones, you can earn a digital badge from Rutgers University. And if you have any questions about that, Giselle on our team will put her email in the chat and we'll follow up with you about that. So I want to just give a brief introduction of our guests and panelists today. We have with us Jim Lyons, who is coordinator of the new President's Program at Clark Atlanta University Executive Leadership Institute. And I'm very proud to be on the advisory board for that program. It's a wonderful program. We have Tamara Stoner, who is University Secretary and Assistant Vice President at Delaware State University, a wonderful HBCU. We have Marc Camille, who is president of Magnus College, is with us, and I am proud to say who I taught at one point. So, and we have Lesley McBain, who is senior director of research at the Association of Governing Boards, with us. And the structure for today is that I'm going to hand it over to Lesley, and she's going to give just a short overview of board structures and committees, because many times we have people who know a lot who attend the webinars, and sometimes we have people who don't know that much. And so we want to give a little bit of an overview. Then we're going to do about 25 minutes of structured Q&A where I'm going to talk to our panelists, ask them some questions, and then we want to make sure that you have a chance to ask your questions. So please put them in the Q&A and I will get to as many as we can. Last time we had so many, I couldn't get to them all, but I will get to as many as we can. So Lesley, I am going to hand it over to you. And Giselle, if you could put up Lesley's slides, that would be great. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thanks so much, Mary Beth. This is part of a very large survey, Policies, Practices, and Composition. Next slide, I'll explain a little bit about it. It's longitudinal. We do this every 5 years. And it's been done differently since 1969. AGB has been tracking board and trustee data. There are over 100 tables in the last report, which was conducted during the 2020 pandemic lockdown. So I want to say, first off, interpret this data with caution. The response rates are lower, but the next survey is scheduled to launch this October. And just as a data point, you don't have to be an AGB member to participate. We welcome everybody. And this captures data on all kinds of board structure, policies, composition. We do public boards, both system and individual institutions, independent, which is the term AGB uses for and nonprofit private institutions, and institutionally related foundation boards for public institutions. In 2015, before I came on in June 2020. That was an interesting way to begin, but we added the 2015 MSI special section, and we continued that in 2020. Next slide. So I'm going to start out with just a little published tables, and then I'll go into a special analysis I did for this webinar. So average board size in 2020 for all publics was a little over almost 12 people. And for independents, a little over 28. That's dropped since 2015, but in all honesty, I'm going to caveat that with response rate. But you can see that this has remained fairly constant over a decade. Next slide. And looking at the average number of board committees, and we do break this by Carnegie in this table, but if you just look at the bottom line below where the total is roughly, 4.5, average 4.5 committees. Next slide. Independence is larger, where you can see the doctoral research segment of the population is the largest at 8.9, but the total is 7.7. And next slide. Then we ask a question of basically, what types of committees do you have on your boards that are standing committees, that are not ad hocs convened for a particular purpose? And we ask respondents to put these into buckets. And you'll see by the large other in the public, there are a lot of what I would call triple threats, if you want to use the musical theater term, where it's academic affairs and student affairs and campus life, or it's student life and it's campus security and it's student affairs. So there's a lot of variation, and boards do this because their missions differ, their configurations differ, and they need to do what works for them. Next slide. This is the parallel for the independent boards, where there are more discrete buckets here. You can see where it's not quite as high, not at all as high really, in the other category. But again, institutions and systems and foundations, though we're not discussing them today, have to reconfigure. So, and everybody has their own name for things. So we do try to just get it into buckets. Next slide. Now getting to this data, which I pulled out of the 2020 files to try and take a look and see, is there anything specific to the MSIs? Next slide. For this, the average size of board size for the public MSIs, the purple on your left, is 11.1. The independent MSIs, the blue to your right, is 25.3. Now, the overall public size and the MSI average size track. The independent MSI average size is a little smaller than the average size you saw in the table before of 28.1. Again, I'm going to caveat that with response rate, because for this survey conducted in the height of lockdown, the ends for the MSIs were only 29 for the independent and 26 for the public. So please just caveat my data here, because I do. For average number of committees, again, for the publics, 4.4 here, 4.5 average for the entire study. It tracks. And for the MSIs in the independent sector, 7.1 versus 7.7 overall. Again, so this is tracking. Next slide. I wanted to take a look at, you saw all those committees listed. I wanted to take a look at what the top three broke out to be with the MSIs themselves, where you can see that you're looking at academic affairs, you're looking at audit, you're looking at trustee nominating governance, executive, finance, and budget. For the independents, that was a three-way tie for first place between audit, trustee / nominating / governance. And I should say that's because boards use different names for this. We just put that into that bucket. And for the finance and budget. Next slide. And then looking at the types, again, we're trying to put these into types because everyone has their own terminology. And when I came onto AGB, I was told very quickly that, and I believe this was attributed to Rick Ligon, the retired CEO, when you've seen one board, you've seen one board. So but you do look at finance and budget, audit, trustee nominating governance tied with academic affairs for the publics. Other was, again, very large because you had all those combination committees. Interestingly, going down to number 7, where the tie was between education / academic and student affairs as a combined committee and student affairs and campus life. It's interesting how people configure and reconfigure to suit their needs. Next slide. And again, looking at the independent sector where audit, finance, budget, trustee nominating governance are tied, then the next tie you have down is in the education, academic, and student affairs combined with other. So it does get complicated. And of course, with the independents in those institutions that have a religious mission or identity, that's a standing committee. That's very important to their culture. And on the independent sector, we don't want to forget about that. Next slide. Okay, I should have said I'm originally from the Northeast, so I talk very quickly. Sorry about that. So I will hand it back to Mary Beth, and I'm excited to hear from everyone else.
All right. Thank you. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Lesley, for giving us a little bit of background context. It's always great to have that. And so we have lots of questions, and I'm going to direct them toward various people. So, but we'll have plenty of time to hear from everybody. So my first question is directed toward um, Tamara and Jim. And that is, what are the key characteristics of optimal board structures supporting transformative leadership and within the MSI context? So I'm really looking at, what are the things that we are hoping to see when it comes to board structure to support leaders who want to make a difference and make change. So I'll start with Tamara.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth, and thank you, Lesley, for your presentation. So an optimal board structure should include diversity of knowledge and representation. A board should include a mixture of members from various backgrounds, and this will guarantee broader perspectives and access to networks that will ultimately benefit the institution. Some of those backgrounds include finance, healthcare, fundraising, athletics, marketing, IT, risk management, and the list goes on and on. But we also want to be mindful to be inclusive of gender, race, and age as well. Another thing that I wanted to mention was the commitment to the institution's mission, just reminding your board that they need to be deeply invested in the institution's mission and the values and the student success. We do have here at DSU what we give our trustees. It's like a little fact book. It's about hand size, and it could fit right into your coat pocket or nicely into your purse. And it outlines our mission, our vision. It has our strategic plan outlined in here, some of our history, and it gives a lot of detail in here so that they're constantly reminded. And when they go out and ask questions, they can quickly go to this as their go-to little cheat sheet, so to speak, to enable them to answer some of the questions that they are asked when they're out and about in the community. Also, we want to reference strong leadership and governance practices that consists of clearly defined roles, well-functioning executive and governance committees, and strategic planning processes that align with the institution's priorities. And lastly, I wanted to mention regular self-assessment and training. You can take advantage of these things through board retreats. For DSU, we use this as an opportunity to engage with our trustees, our board members, and have these trainings and professional development sessions related to inclusivity, et cetera, anything that is needful during that particular time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate you being so thorough too. Jim, what are your thoughts?
Well, I guess I should say I appreciate Tamara being so thorough, but she's left me nothing to say. She did an outstanding job. So let me back up and say, Tamara, one of the things Tamara talked about was continuous board assessment. And I think that that's critical because the board has to look inward and then determine whether you are equipped as a board to do the kinds of things that Tamara just talked about. So, and we do it through board retreats and special sessions with boards. But if you do the self-assessment, and I mean now doing it for reasons other than to check the box for an accreditation commission, I'm not talking about that kind of assessment because a lot of, well, don't want to criticize boards, but some boards do the self-assessment so that they can tell the accreditation people we've done one. But I'm talking about really getting into it, looking at yourself, looking at your mission, looking at the opportunity to move the institution forward, work with the leadership team, and then assess whether or not you have what is necessary to do those things. And with that self-assessment, it puts you in the position to do those things that we just heard from Tamara.
Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. So thanks for adding that too. I appreciate that. So my next question I'm going to direct toward Marc and Tamara and Lesley. And I also wanted to mention that Marc is president of a college that is a Hispanic serving institution. So one of the reasons why we had him come is because of his institution's designation. So my question is, how can MSI boards ensure that their structures align with the institution's mission and goals for transformative change? So how do you make that happen? I'll start with you, Marc, and then move to Tamara and Lesley.
Sure. Thanks, Mary Beth. Yeah, little more context, right? So Albertus is an HSI, as of a year and a half ago, achieved the threshold. It's also the most diverse Catholic college in New England, more than 60% of our students coming from underrepresented backgrounds, and we're small. We're about 1,200. So I offer that as context, but when I think about, board structure and how it aligns with mission and really supports transformative change, the committee structure comes to mind, but I want to hit and build on a couple of points that have already been made. The first of which is it has to start with a board's understanding of, endorsement of, and championing of mission. And that seems straightforward, but I can't overstate the importance of that, because for a board member to come on and start to serve, it's assumed that mission is understood, but mission is nuanced from institution to institution. And as a Catholic college, as a Dominican Catholic college, there are elements around our mission that are very distinctive. And if someone hasn't come from that background, the educational piece of that is essential. So getting the full board to understand and champion mission is the first thing. The second piece of that is also understanding strategy and vision. What is it that the institution has articulated as its strategic plan, its strategic objectives, and what is the vision that we're kind of working toward, and making sure that the board understands that, because those two elements, coupled with committee structures, coupled with the elements that Jim and Tamara have shared about the diversity of the board's membership, those are recipes for positioning a president for success and ultimately positioning the institution to move forward toward that idea of transformative change.
Thank you. Thank you. Tamara, do you want to comment?
Absolutely, and thank you for that. So I just want to even further support what Marc has already stated, which is the alignment of the strategic plan with the structure of the board committees. And I could proudly say that DSU is making sure that we continuously stay in alignment with that and keeping our board members mindful of the strategic plan. So again, even at our board retreats, we send out another copy of that strategic plan so that they can review. It's on our website. They have KPIs attached to them, and there are times when it's reported out on. And again, to the strategic plan that we have 5 pillars related in our plan to our board committee structure. So we have a student success pillar in our plan. We have academic excellence in our plan. We have operational effectiveness, infrastructure, and financial health. So our plan is concise, and it flows directly with our committee structure. And so we are very proud to be able to still continue to advance our committee structure in that way. We also think that it's very good to foster a spirit of shared governance as far as continuously keeping our faculty and our staff, our students, and our community stakeholders engaged in our meetings, and even in the decision-making process, and having different forums to where they can speak out and voice their concerns regarding the institution. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Lesley, anything from you on that, from your kind of perspective, working with so
Well,
many institutions?
well, first off, thank you to everybody, because that was really insightful. And from the data perspective, from different institutions, the majority of institutions in 2020 wanted to diversify their board. And the tie there was between professional background and race ethnicity. So in looking at transformation, hearkening back to what Jim said about assessment and what everyone else has said about being cognizant of where you're going and where you want to go, and making sure that you have data and that the board is looking at the data, and that if there's something that they don't understand the data or is different in the data, that they get the clarification they need and use data to help guide decision making.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, having served on quite a few boards of trustees of colleges, it is just so important that the decisions be based in data, right? That absolutely important. And occasionally, you know, you'll get some trustees that really don't want to do that, and so really important. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so my next question, Tamara, I'm gonna direct toward you, and I'd love for you to talk about what essential committees should an MSI board have to support this kind of transformative leadership, and why you think those particular committees are really essential?
Thank you, Mary Beth. And I'm so happy that Lesley shared that wonderful slide presentation early on, because it did highlight and confirm those that I have listed here, which is academic and student success, financial and audit, diversity, equity, and inclusion, governance and a nominating committee, operations, innovation, and strategic initiative committees. So they're in alignment with those top tiered committees. And like Lesley stated earlier, they differ in titles and themes across different universities, but they all speak to the same exact things. So I do feel as though these are very key focal points for universities to consider for their board committee structures. For specifically finance and audit committee, it ensures the financial health and sustainability for the institution. And it also gives a way to optimize resources as well. It provides that opportunity for governance. It maintains the board effectiveness. James spoke earlier about training and even to that professional development. Like, this is assessments and things of that nature. These have to be continued, and it has to be continuity across the board. And it can't be something that you do every once in a while. It has to be scheduled out, and it has to be consistent. So with that, I'll turn back to you, Mary Beth.
Thanks. It was interesting that one of the committees that you mentioned is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and especially a lot of times people think of HBCUs and wouldn't think that that would be a committee that would be really important, right? Because people forget that HBCUs have always been diverse, have always been equitable, and have always included people, right? So it is a really important thing that you said. I thought that was really important.
Yes, and I would just like to add, so we at DSU, we have an actual group that is here that is our diversity and equity inclusion group. It's outside of our board committee structure. However, it does speak up through our board, and they're able to share information. They're also able to share their initiatives, and the board is able to participate and have the knowledge gained from that participation in these D&I initiatives.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. All right. So,
Yeah,
oh,
can
yes.
let me add,
Yes. Go ahead.
There's rarely anything left to say after Tamara, and I need to learn that. But I wanted to say that I'm happy, really, that we're having this discussion because in many ways it shows how we have changed as a higher ed community. Now, I don't want to date myself, so I won't do that, but I can tell you that when I entered this business, boards seem to be locked into having only those committees that could interface directly with the leadership team person. So, you had to have an academic affairs committee or student affairs committee. It just mirrored the structure of the institution. And it's great to see over time that boards have gotten away from that and don't feel that they have to be locked into the institutional structure. And so they're looking at ways to deal with not only the historic structure, but current issues, priorities at the institution, and mission. So I think it's a good thing, even though you have all of these committees listed and the names are overlapping in their ties. But what that says to me, as an old school person, is that we're making progress and that we're moving forward, trying to really be mission focused and transformative leadership concerns, et cetera.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So the next question I'm going to direct toward Marc and also you, Jim. Can you give any examples of innovative or non-traditional committees that you're aware of on boards that have driven meaningful change, especially at your own institution, at MSIs, HBCUs? I'll start with you, Marc.
Sure. Yeah. So two things come to mind for me on this. First of all, boards have standing committees, and then typically standing committees require amendments or changes to bylaws in order to make changes within the committees. There is always, I'll use an example of what we've done at Albertus, as our board has evolved over time. There's the opportunity to constitute ad hoc committees of the board, and they may, have a defined period of time or a defined task and be sunsetted, or they may prove themselves to be worthy of becoming a standing committee, and then in which case bylaws might be amended. But so number one is the possibilities around an ad hoc committee being stood up or constituted. In our case, I can think of two examples where that has been very beneficial in terms of supporting meaningful change. And the first of which, at Albertus, we're an NCAA Division III institution. And within our traditional undergraduate population, almost half of our students play at least one varsity sport. So NCAA athletics for us is very much an enrollment driver. It is part of our enrollment management, student success efforts, et cetera. And it's also part of our strategy. And so we have constituted an ad hoc committee of the board on intercollegiate athletics. And that's an example of where creating time and space for two things. Number one, to get into the strategy around athletics, but secondly, to tap into the interest and the expertise of some of our board members to contribute in that space. So that's one example I can think of. The second one is a committee that had been constituted. It's now been sunsetted, but we created an ad hoc committee on strategic planning. And it coincided with the development of this, what is now our existing strategic plan. But the point being to, again, create the opportunity for a subset of the board to liaise with the strategic planning process, and then to represent the board and then bring back to the full board for discussion and deliberation. And so those are two examples I lift up. They happen to fit what our needs were at Albertus Magnus, but again, the opportunities around ad hoc versus standing. Thanks.
Thank you. Jim, how about you? Can you think of any examples of innovative or non-traditional committees that drive change at HBCUs, for example?
there are two examples that I can give that grew out of AGB engagements that I've been involved in. In one instance, a board, borrowing what Marc said, a board decided to create an ad hoc committee on committees. Okay. Now that may sound a little basic, but what they were dealing with was the fact that they were being crippled and hampered by the committees. Some of the committees were not functioning, others were functioning in a way that challenged the board. Uh, some of the committees were meeting, they were having public session, public discussions, and people would come and testify before the committee, and then they'd go back and repeat that whole process at the full board. So the idea of creating a committee on committees, and it was ad hoc, was to say, okay, something isn't working here. Let's get down to business. Let's look at all of these committees and try to come up with a way that committees will function in the best interest of the college over a period of time. So that was one. And the idea was for the committee to work itself out of business, which it did. Okay. A second example was a board that was almost embarrassed into taking on a particular challenge because it was in the same zip code, same side of town as what people would identify as the underserved, under-resourced community. And the institution itself just grew tired of the criticism. You know, here you are, you're located in that community. It's got the quote, the underperforming schools, the highest crime rate, anything negative that you could associate with it. So the board made a decision to try to do something about this and chose healthcare, health disparities, etc., and decided to marshal the strength of the institution to address that issue. And not only did they pull from all of the departments and programs, et cetera, the board strength, they even identified individuals who were not on the board, who had a background in health disparities, et cetera. And it was the first time they'd ever pulled people from off campus to become part of the board process. But the idea was we're going to at least try to change some of the issues regarding healthcare disparities.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate those examples, and I like how kind of innovative the last one is there too. So great contribution. So I've got two more questions that I'm going to ask our panel, and I see we've got lots of questions in the Q&A, but if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A because I know folks are excited to answer your questions. So this next one is directed toward Tamara and Lesley, and I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about how MSI boards and their committees ensure effective collaboration and communication, how they can ensure that they're, that the committees and board is effectively collaborating and communicating. And I know from serving on boards that sometimes this doesn't always work. So wondering about your strategies for that, especially when we're thinking about how to really support institutional transformation. So Tamara, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Mary Beth. So I would say technology is very, very important in making sure that the document sharing process is working for us, the virtual collaboration with the real-time engagement. So I remember during COVID, that was a real hiccup for our board and probably for many others. We did have a board that wasn't really doing anything technology-wise as far as meeting virtually and things like that, and not even on a consistent basis. So it was a real hurdle to overcome during COVID to ensure that we had 100% participation. And I can say as a result of COVID and the utilization of technology, we have pretty much 100 participation across the board with our committees and even in our board meetings and things of that nature. So we've used WebEx, we've used Zoom, we've used MS Teams, even for like document sharing. We have portals. I know many people use Onboard through AGB. Shout out to AGB for Onboard. But also we use here Board Vantage. And that's usually our document repository where we can keep all of our information. But when we want to share things with the university at large, then we can use Teams. We also have a student sharing hub app. We call it the DSU Hub. It's an app that trustees can download, our community can download, students, anyone can download onto their phones, and it keeps you in real-time engagement. So if there's anything going on with campus or the like, if there's change in hours of operation, if there are events and things that are occurring at the university, this is a great way to keep everyone engaged real time. So I just wanted to add that. And then just to add to what James was saying earlier, the collapsing of committee, sometimes cross collaboration is needful. We just realized not last year that our innovation and sustainability committee was basically, there was a lot of overlap between that and our operations committee. So we had to fold the innovations and civic sustainability committee into the operations committee, which now works very, very well. Again, stakeholder engagement, different methods of doing that is having town halls and surveys and things of that nature. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, Lesley, what do you want to say?
Wow. Is there anything to add? I'm not
I know.
sure, but I really want to lift up your point about technology though, because I came on to HB during COVID and we're putting in, or at least I'm putting in the research to see, how has this changed now that we're 5 years out from our periodic surveys, one being the survey of board professionals, which the people who make the logistics work, who make the technology work for the board, and how have their methods changed by communicating with their board. We saw a lot in 2020 PPC of, did your board meet electronically? Well, yes, that was 2020, but, has that changed? Have committees begun to meet more electronically, whereas the full board might meet? I'm not saying any of this is solid data yet. I'm just saying things that are coming to mind listening, where you convene the full board in person, but do your committees meet virtually? And there, do you get better and faster communication in this world where things are happening very rapidly? Do you need to stand up an ad hoc committee on X? Do you need to collapse committees of Y and Z? And I think just harkening back to your blog, Mary Beth, for AGB, about not being afraid, being able to support your leadership and say, is this working for us? Is this still meeting our mission? What new forms of technology? We have AI, and who knows what that is going to do to the entire institution as well as the board. The board is not immune to that. So I think it's just really a process that never ends of being open, being alert, and being willing to change.
Thank you. Yeah, I noticed that someone has their AI bot attending the meeting today and taking notes. So yeah, absolutely, all of those things. Thank
Mary
you.
Beth, may I add something
Yes.
that even Tamara hasn't mentioned today? And
Oh,
that's difficult. And that is the use of the consent agenda. I wanted to mention that because, reporting out and all of these committees and coming to a board meeting and having to sit and rehash all that has taken place at the committee level was really a challenge for me as the university president and the board member. And so I was very pleased when some members of our board who are were out of the corporate world introduced the consent agenda, where you would not have to sit in a formal board meeting, the full board meeting, and vote on every single thing that has happened in every meeting. And so that did allow things to to move forward so that the board could focus its time and attention to the kind of things that you're talking about in terms of transformative leadership. Boards, back in the day, by the time they finished going through every committee and the minutes and actions taken at every committee, it was time to pack up and go home. And so they didn't have the time to focus on what really matters. What are those long-term sustainable issues? So I thought I would get that in before Tamara thought of it and came back to us with it. Tamara, I'll leave you alone. I just wish you had been at Delaware State when I worked there.
I wish I was. Thank you, Jim.
Well, thank you for that contribution too. And Tamara, this is all love. We just want you to know that it's all love. You're just incredibly thorough. So, all right. So my last question I'm directing toward Marc and Jim, and that is, what practices can committees adopt to evaluate and improve their impact on the institution's strategic goals? And I'll start with you, Marc.
Sure, thanks. First of all, I'm glad Jim brought up the notion of consent agenda because it's part of how I would address this question. Your best board members, your most impactful board members do not want to be talked at. They want to contribute to the discussion, the dialogue, the strategy, and to help the institution move forward. So a consent agenda is a great way to create that time. Along the same lines, two things come to mind. Number one is really fostering a culture of board engagement and voices being heard. Oftentimes when you have new board members, they might sit more on the sidelines. And I think between the board chair, the president, you can really reach out and be proactive about inviting new board members to contribute. So that certainly comes to mind. I think, two other thoughts I'd say that have been successful for us. Number one is the idea of a culture of assessment, a board doing a self-assessment, whether it's every year, maybe less formally, or every few years, a little bit more comprehensive, but to get the pulse of where the board is and where value is being perceived and time could be better spent, et cetera. The final thing I'll offer on this, and it's something that's new for us, but at every board meeting now, my presidential goals are brought back in front of the full board with updates on year to date. And the reason for that is, number one, so that the full board is involved in whether it's, assessment, evaluation, but also my goals are institutional goals and they are strategic goals. And so it keeps those elements of what we're trying to aspire to achieve front and center at every board meeting during my president's report. So just a couple of examples and thoughts.
Thank you. And I really love that last idea. I think that's incredibly, incredibly important. It reminds the board too of what they asked you to do. So,
Sure.
so,
Yeah.
all right, Jim, and Tamara wasn't asked this question, so I'm excited to hear what you got to say.
I'm grateful. Seriously though, to piggyback what Marc has just said, the idea of a culture of engagement and a culture of assessment. Boards through the governance committee and evaluating yourself should take the opportunity to bring the kind of expertise and strength to the board that is needed at a given time. But you don't want people to come in and feel that because they're new, that they can't participate or they're not welcome, et cetera. And one of the things, again, as you talk about assessment, there are very clear questions on assessment tools. Do you feel valued as a board member? Do you feel that you are being listened to and that your contribution is recognized, et cetera? So the culture of assessment, culture of engagement, all of that really comes together in a very strong and powerful way. And if you're going to have a diverse board, then you do want those diverse opinions, attitudes, behaviors, whatever, um, to feel good about to feel good about themselves.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I want to say thank you to everybody for answering my questions. We have a lot of questions, so I'm going to take the remainder of our time together and ask questions. And if you want to answer the question, if you could just put your hand up that way, that would help me a little bit. And if no one puts their hand up, I'm just going to call on someone, okay? All right. So there's lots of interesting questions in here, and I thought I would start out. Some of these have to do with the exact topic that we're talking about, and others are, related to boards overall. So one of them that I thought was really interesting is, can you discuss insights about the merits, risks, theater, and perhaps of having students as active voting board members and also faculty? And I was wondering if there was anyone who would be interested in answering that question. Just raise your hand if you are. All right, Jim, let's hear what you have to say.
I've spent a lot of time around that as I've again gone on AGB engagements as a senior consultant, and that really, there's no rule that says students should not participate, faculty should not participate. um, there are very interesting concerns on both ends of this spectrum. I've worked with boards who felt very strongly that in the spirit of shared governance, that the faculty, student, and staff opinions should be heard and heard in a formal way. On the other hand, I've worked with boards that have said they don't even belong in the room, the other extreme. Uh, and then I've also worked with boards that have compromised and said, okay, faculty, staff, and students can be on the board of trustees, but you don't have a vote. So I've seen it, in so many different ways. I think it's important for boards to recognize that under shared governance and the spirit of shared governance, there should be a way for persons in the overall community to participate. But I have not found uh, any place where there was a hard and fast rule or law against this kind of involvement.
Thank you. Thank you. This next question, I think, Mark, I kind of want to direct it toward you, and that's with you might not thank me later, but I'm going to direct it toward you. So with the recent federal actions regarding DEI and grants, what type of communication have you had with your board around that? And has that been something you've had to talk about? Just wondering, and how do you do that too?
Wait, there have been federal executive orders? What? No. No, actually, I don't mind speaking to the question from, an N of one perspective. And the reason being, Albertus, as I mentioned, is a Catholic college. And for us, all of our commitments around diversity, equity, and inclusion stem from the the tenets of Catholic social teaching, affirming the dignity of every human being, the idea of, all are welcome at our table. And we live that out every day at Albertus, or try to do that. And if you look at our student body, et cetera, there's evidence to suggest that we do that. So as the chaos of the new administration and all of the executive orders, et cetera, have come down, and the threats around federal funding, ears to the ground for sure, relying on trusted resources of information coming and paying careful attention to possible impact. But for us, our mantra, and including communications and affirmation from the board, has been we keep laser focused on serving our students to the best of our ability, to looking out for the best interest, the care of our faculty, our staff, the Albertus family, And as this stuff settles in and laws, you know, take shape, so to speak, or Congress takes action, we'll respond as necessary. But you know, all of our commitments around diversity and inclusion stand as tall today as they did before, you know, January.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that. I really appreciate it. Here's a interesting question, and raise your hand if you want to answer. This person says, curious about the role of collaboration. Are there best practices for structural models such as composition, term limits, and voting that promote collaboration? Have consensus models been used to successfully promote collaboration and cooperation, even if there is not complete agreement on the transformative topics? Anyone wanna volunteer for that one? Lesley, how about you? You got any comments about that one?
Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah.
I will defer to my colleagues on the consensus
Mhm.
because I'm not in the boardroom where it happens. But there are so many models. And a quick jump back to the previous question asked about student faculty voting. I was busy looking up some things in my 100 data tables, so couldn't get my hand up. About nationally in the last survey, 44.7% of public board respondents and 7.9% of independent board respondents had student voters who had a voting role. And I do have faculty and staff. People can contact me at research@agb.org if they're interested in more. But in terms of models, again, it's going back to what everybody's been saying here. The models may be different for your own board, but you do need to model that communication, model that transparency, model that forward thinking. And I'm going to defer to everybody else on exactly how to do that.
Anybody else have any comments? Yes, Mark, I see your hand.
Just a quick comment. You know, I'll suggest that collaboration helps build consensus. And so with our board, let's just take the development of a strategic plan, for example. The board having opportunities to launch it, contribute to it, give feedback throughout in an open environment where all ideas are welcome, but a reminder that necessarily all ideas don't end up in the finished product. But the most important piece for a board is to feel that they are both engaged and valued. And part of being valued is that they're heard. And so this is where the idea of collaborative thinking, collaborative, you know, opportunities can help build consensus and then speak to, you know, ultimately board engagement and satisfaction. So I think they're kind of very closely related, the idea of collaborating, but ultimately that helping to lead toward consensus building.
Thank you. Okay, so I have a question now that we get during every single webinar related to boards. Okay, and I'm gonna ask it again because I think it's really important. So that question is, what are some of the challenges a board can present that may hinder the effectiveness of a university leader? And how can a leader best address those challenges so as to create a collaborative, inclusive relationship? So who would like to answer? Jim has his hand up.
Let me get my 2 cents in before Tamara decides that she's going to answer. At the Executive Leadership Institute, we spend a lot of time on this particular item. And as we talk to new presidents and aspiring presidents, one of the realities and one of the challenges that you have is that, and I say this also now because I've been on a number of boards, you have some board chairs and board members who want to be the president. Now, that's a problem. That's a real problem. And so there are presidents whose work and vision and all have been hindered because there were individuals on the board who wanted to be the president. And so, you know, when you have that dynamic, one of the things we talk about in the Institute is, you know, how do we help new presidents navigate board relationships? And one of the things you must first help the individuals understand that you may very well have board members who would like to be the president or feel that they can do the job better than you, or that's not how we do it in the private sector. This wouldn't, so you got that whole thing wanting to bring the private sector principles in, you know, and say, that's why, quote, higher education isn't. So there are a lot of conflicts, and I think that we really do have to spend the kind of time, Mary Beth, that you and your organization are doing, working with new presidents and aspiring presidents to understand the dynamics. And I know I'm spending more time talking to board members and board chairs in particular about the important relationship that must exist between the president and the chair of the board.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see, I've got another question that's very, very interesting. It says, shared governance is an increasing challenge as societal culture is changing. The current cancel culture makes it very difficult for institutions to manage the expectations of students when it comes to shared governance. How can this be successfully managed when often the student's perspective is now and leadership perspective is now and future sustainability of an institution? So that's a really interesting question. I'm just wondering if anybody'd like to tackle it. Anybody? Tamara, are you going to tackle that question?
Behaving.
No, come on, Tamara. We want to hear what you got to say.
It just brought me back to mind something that we developed a few years ago under our previous board chair. It was called the chair student circle. It just allowed an opportunity for students to engage with the chair, and so they could see that their concerns are valued and that the institutional at the highest level hears them and they see them. And so it provided this opportunity in a format where they could just meet regularly with the board chair to just discuss some of their concerns, whether it's academic, whether it's personal, whatever it is that concerned them, they were able to bring it to the chair circle. And it was obviously confidential, but from that, the chair could report out, on what she had heard. And then the leadership at the highest level, which our president, could hear about what it is that is going on with these students that they couldn't voice in other formats. And so that's what came to mind. But I did want to talk back to that one question with regard to the students being on the board committees and being able to vote. We do have one student who is on a committee level and he's able to vote. So I just wanted to add that in there as well.
Yeah. Well, Tamara, thank you so much for answering that question. As usual, you did such a great job. So, I'm going to kind of close us out. First of all, I wanted to say thank you so much to the panelists. Just absolutely wonderful thoughts today. And I appreciate you taking your time to be with us. I want to thank all of the attendees. We have so many people attend today. And thank you for your really, really good questions. I got to all but 3 of them. And really, really appreciate you being with us. I hope that you will all spend time supporting higher education, talking to people about why higher education is so important. We need to be storytellers out there. We need to be telling people about our experiences and why having a college education is vital to our democracy. And also just want to say thank you to AGB for co-sponsoring this and ECMC for funding it, and to our wonderful staff at the Center for Minority Serving Institutions, in particular, Giselle and Jacinda, who have been behind the scenes today. Thank you so much, everybody. Stay strong out there and try to stay as positive as you can. And if you need anything from us, please feel free to reach out. Thanks, everybody. Take care.